It is estimated that only 3% of the population of the UK speak pure RP. RP, in case you don't know, stands for Received Pronunciation. All the main dictionaries in the UK, including the Oxford English Dictionary, the Cambridge English Dictionary, the Collins Dictionary, give a phonetic transcription for all words using RP. If you're learning English, British English as a foreign language, then your textbooks will be written in RP. And if you have Siri, Alexa or Google Home set to British English, then it's RP you'll be listening to at the time of recording anyway. Okay, Google, hello.
Hello, what can I do for you?
There you are. That's RP English. Google doesn't do regional accents. RP is also sometimes called Standard British English or Oxford English or BBC English or the Queen's English, though this last one is a little misleading because the Queen doesn't speak RP. I'll explain that in a moment. Have you ever wondered where this accent originated? Today we're going to look at who speaks it, where it's spoken and the history of this accent, and with a little help from my cousin Tarquin. Say hello, Tarquin. Well, hello. We're going to look at the standard RP that I speak, more or less, and the posh English that the Queen, Boris Johnson and maybe Hugh Grant speak. So if you want to know more, then stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dental Talk TV. So it's the language of the dictionaries. When you look up a word in an English dictionary, next to that you'll have the phonetic script that tells you how to pronounce the word in RP. So that means lots of people speak RP, right? Wrong, actually. Think about British accents as a spectrum. On the one side you have RP and on the other you have a strong regional accent, or maybe some people say a dialect, such as Scouse from Liverpool or Geordie from Newcastle or Glaswegian from Glasgow or Cockney from London. Very few people will have a pure RP accent. Almost everyone will fall somewhere along the spectrum. What about me? Well, I have an accent which is not far from RP, but like most people, you can hear a regional accent. It's a London accent in my case, as I was born and grew up in London. So, for example, people tell me that I say months instead of months, and I sometimes say but instead of but. So my accent is not quite RP. So who speaks it? Who speaks this RP accent? Well, it's the accent of the middle classes of the East Midlands and the South of England. It's kind of an official definition. While this might be true to an extent, it doesn't tell the whole story. Firstly, most middle class people in the South don't speak a pure RP. There's usually a hint of a regional accent. Secondly, and depending on the background and the education, you can find RP speakers throughout the UK. So, and I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here, but although generally it's a more southern accent and generally it's more middle class, the distinguishing feature of RP is that you cannot determine where the speaker is from or his or her social class. It is regionally non-specific and class neutral. As I said, so that's a generalization. But it is generally more a southern accent and generally more a middle class accent, but there are many, many exceptions to that rule. But that's why the Queen, Boris Johnson, all these people I mentioned don't speak RP. Rather, it's a posh accent because we know exactly their social class just from listening to them. Boris Johnson went to Eton and Oxford, and the Queen is well, she's the Queen, so that probably puts her amongst the upper classes, I would say. It's strange, isn't it, that this form of English is the one which, along with standard American English, is the most widely taught pronunciation in the world, and yet very few native speakers actually speak it. Let's have a look at the history. How come this accent, of all the English accents, became the standard? The phrase received pronunciation was coined in 1869 by the linguist A.J. Ellis. Received, by the way, has the meaning of accepted or approved. The term only became widely used after the publication of the English Pronouncing Dictionary in 1917 by Daniel Jones. He called the accent public school pronunciation. If you're unfamiliar with the British schooling system, public schools are elite private schools where the royalty and the toffs send their kids. It was the accent of the ruling class. By the way, don't confuse public schools with state schools where plebs like me went to. Okay, Jones used that accent because the ruling class went to the public schools, such as Eton, before going on to study at Oxford. What's that? Oh, it's Boris Johnson went to Eton, Oxford. David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, Eton, Oxford. Theresa May went to Oxford. Doesn't seem like much has changed. Anyway, when making a pronunciation dictionary, you need a reference point as a standard. And for that, they chose received pronunciation, which was loosely based on an elite accent of the East Midlands. That's around Oxford and Cambridge and London to some extent. During the 14th and 15th century, the East Midlands had become not only the most populated but also the wealthiest part of England, and for that reason it became seen as the standard. The BBC adopted this as its standard pronunciation in 1922. They thought that if they chose a regional accent, it would alienate some listeners, or that a regional accent might be less understood by non-native speakers. The BBC had and still has a large audience around the world. Interestingly, during the Second World War, one of the BBC's principal newsreaders was Wilfrid Pickles, who had a broad Yorkshire accent. Why did they do this? Because the Nazis were broadcasting propaganda in English over the radio to Britain, and while they could copy the RP English, the BBC believed they couldn't copy a strong regional accent. So people would know that they were listening to a genuine BBC newsreader. A regional accent gave its broadcast authenticity. So, does the Queen and the royal family speak RP? No, not at all. This is what people might call a posh or an upper class accent or an aristocratic accent. There has been a kind of revolution over the last 60 years, because now the RP accent is a middle class accent and the public school accent is now considered something different entirely. The Queen, Prince Harry, all the royal family, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Cameron and all the aristocracy speak with a public school accent or an upper class accent or posh accent, a lot of people call it. So let me give you an example to show you what I mean. Take this word. I say often. That's how I was brought up to say it. Often. Some people these days say often. That's okay. That's okay. You may be the child of Beelzebub, but that's okay. Language is not a static thing, and a lot of people say that, and that's fine. But how does the Queen say this word? Do you know? Is it often? Is it often? No. She says orphan. Listen to this.
It's a reminder for us all that giant leaps often start with small steps. That giant leaps often start with small steps.
In Fowler's Modern English Usage, 1926, I have a copy right here, he says that there are two ways to pronounce this word. often and orphan. Well, that's not the case today. The dictionaries, in fact, only give one correct pronunciation in British and American English. In British English, often, and in American English, often. Okay? No mention of orphan, no mention of often. By the way, the Queen also says off. I'm off to the races. So that was RP in the 1920s, but it's not now. Some people call it a conservative RP, but it's not. It's a historical RP. That would be a more appropriate term. By the way, looking for a good book about the English language, Fowler's Modern English Usage is wonderful if you're looking for a style guide about the English language, about usage and pronunciation. It is dated 1926, however, there is an updated version written in 2004, I think. I haven't read the updated version. I'm using this one, which is probably why my English sounds a bit weird. Anyway, I'll put a link to both editions in the comments somewhere, okay? So a common misconception is that the Queen's English is standard English. Well, no, it isn't. Accents constantly change over time. It used to be the case that if you wanted to work in a so-called goods job, then you lost your regional accent. You might take what they called elocution lessons to speak correctly. But since maybe the 1960s, as a result of social changes in society, speaking in RP has become less important in the workplace and in society in general. Nowadays you'll hear regional accents in the media, in government, among university professors and the civil service. So young people today feel no pressure to lose their regional background, and for that reason a pure RP accent is quite rare and sounds rather old-fashioned. Somewhat bizarrely, when you do meet people speaking perfect RP, they are often educated abroad. English-speaking schools outside the UK don't belong to any region, and the RP still has a prestige. So just to give you a couple of examples of people who speak like that, Freddie Mercury, beautiful RP accent, isn't it? He had his own idiosyncrasies, but he has RP accent. There is no trace of a regional accent. He speaks with a perfect British accent. And yet, where did he grow up? In Zanzibar. And he went to school in Mumbai.
It's going very, very well, and it's getting better every day, because I think it's a new tour, and we're learning a lot after every show.
So listen how he says tour with two syllables. Tour. That's RP, but it's somewhat old-fashioned. Today it's generally said as one syllable. Tour. Then he says better every day, stressing better and every as separate words without a linking R. Today you would probably say better every day. Can you hear the intrusive R? Better every day. With the word show, he has a very rounded O. Show, show, while I'd say show. So he speaks RP, but with a foot in the past and a hint of posh English. Listen again.
It's going very, very well, and it's getting better every day, because I think it's a new tour, and we're learning a lot after every show.
He moved to London when he was 18, but there's nothing of India and nothing of London in his accent whatsoever. And he's certainly not unique. Richard E. Grant, someone else who speaks with this perfect RP, sounds a bit old-fashioned. Where did he grow up? In Swaziland. I remember when I was a student, and to make ends meet, I worked in a call centre which sent vehicles to broken down cars around London, and there was a guy there, his name was Benjamin, that had this beautiful pronunciation. He sounded like a BBC presenter from the 1950s when he spoke. He would say something like, "Oh, madam, Let me reassure you that you shan't be waiting long. One of our vehicles will be with you presently. One day I said to him, wow, Benjamin, your accent is so perfect, and that wonderful diction. May I ask, where are you from? Where did you learn the accent? Oh yes, certainly, I'm from Lagos in Nigeria. Obviously went to a fancy school in Lagos, imagine reserved for the elite. The irony is that if you meet someone who speaks a perfect British RP, then he or she might well have been educated abroad. The British almost all have some kind of regional accent. So be careful if you are learning English as a foreign language. If you're too good, you'll sound so British that no one will believe that you're British. And that's pretty ironic, isn't it? So now let's compare RP with posh English or the Queen's English. And remember that even among upper class English speakers, there are pronunciation differences, but we won't dwell into that today. I want to keep this linguistic part relatively brief. I mean, Hugh Grant speaks a posh English. He was educated at a private school and Oxford, and you can hear his poshness, but he doesn't sound anything like the Queen. So we are making some sweeping generalizations, but I don't want this video to be 12 hours long. In standard RP, we have an A sound in words such as married, have, cat, while in posh English, it's kind of pronounced somewhere between an A and an E, an sound. Married, have, kit, okay? The O sounds sometimes in posh English becomes or. Gone becomes gorn. It rhymes with dawn, okay? Off, as we've already seen, often is a homonym of orphan, okay? Off rhymes with north, orf, north, off, north in RP. The O sound becomes much rounder. So go, show and low in standard RP. Go, show, low in posh English. The Y at the end of the word is pronounced E in standard RP, but in posh English it's pronounced E. Diary becomes dire. Silly becomes silly. In standard RP, in fluent speech you might drop a T in the middle of the word with a consonant cluster, such as Christmas. Not many people say Christmas, but in posh English you might hear it, Christmas. In standard RP you often drop unstressed syllables in some long words, such as comfortable, which becomes comfortable, vegetable becomes vegetable, medicine becomes medicine. But in posh English they might continue to say comfortable, vegetable, medicine. With words ending in an I sound with two syllables in standard RP, they have only one in posh English, or maybe one and a bit, such as fire in standard English and far in posh English. Choir becomes choir, liar becomes liar, higher, higher. In standard RP you might put in an intrusive R when there is a word that ends with an or sound and the next word begins with an A sound. But in posh English you don't. So for example, law and order, I would say law and order. Can you hear the intrusive R there? There's an R which isn't there when it's written, law and order. But if you're speaking posh English, you might say them all as separate words, law and order, law and order. Or I'd say here and there, here and there. In posh English you might hear them say here and there, here and there. But now let's get a few sentences with my better educated and more intelligent cousin, Tarquin. So, Tarquin, are you ready to compare the differences between RP and Posh English? I'm ready, old bean. Okay. After the party, we went onto the veranda where I shot a lion in my dinner jacket. After the party, we went onto the veranda where I shot a lion in my dinner jacket. How did he get into your dinner jacket? That's a story for another day, old boy. My housemaid has gone off with my valet. How the blazes am I going to fasten my breeches now? My housemaid has gone off with my valet. How the blazes am I going to fasten my breeches now? The Bentley broke down on the way to the opera, so I had to take the underground with the oiks. Never again. The Bentley broke down on the way to the opera, so I had to take the underground with the oiks. Never again. Now that we've had Brexit, we won't need to talk with those horrible people in Europe anymore. Now that we've had Brexit, we won't need to talk with those horrible people in Europe anymore. Where the is Europe? I fired my butler because he forgot to chill the Chardonnay. I fired my butler because he forgot to chill the Chardonnay. I say, young lady, you look ravishing. Fancy going for a spin in my Aston Martin? I say, young lady, you look ravishing. Fancy going for a spin in my Aston Martin? For my birthday, Papa bought me a racehorse. For my birthday, Papa bought me a racehorse. We had a splendid game of elephant polo. The girl by the whirlpool is looking for a new fool. The girl by the whirlpool is looking for a new fool. I was late for the debutante's ball because my postilion had been struck by lightning. I was late for the debutante's ball because my postilion had been struck by lightning. What the hell does that even mean? Who wrote this stuff? What type of life do you lead? You're not normal. Don't forget to listen to our podcasts. You can find them. We've got another YouTube channel called Zeitgeist Banana, or you can find Zeitgeist Banana on all those places where you find podcasts, such as Spotify, iTunes, and the other ones that I can't remember right now.